Buju. Welcome to the Center of Human Rights Research at the Forks launch. My name is Kiera Ladner. I'm the Indigenous intern at the center this summer. I would like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you virtually today from Treaty 1 territory, the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We at the CHRR are excited to have you all join us today virtually as we will be unveiling our new online platform. If you have any questions during the launch, please feel free to add them in the chat or direct message me here on Zoom, and I'll be sure to come back to it at the end during our Q&A session. I also ask that you please mute yourself, and you can also turn off your camera if you choose. I'm going to begin by introducing Dr. Adele Perry. Dr. Perry is the director of the Center for Human Rights Research. She's a non-Indigenous historian who was brought and raised in British Columbia and has taught at the University of Manitoba since 2000. Perry has worked on histories of colonialism in the 19th and 20th century Western Canada and is committed to making connections between the past and present. I will now pass it along to Dr. Perry.
Thank you to Kayla for that introduction, and thank you to everybody who's made time in a busy summer Friday to join us digitally as we kind of launch this particular venture. So those of you who follow the center's social media, and if you don't, you could always start now, know probably already what remarkable work Kayla has done over the course of the summer, where she's really kind of brought our social media work to kind of a new level and lots of interesting material. And this is just kind of a glimmer of some of the really important work she has done. So thank you very much to Kayla. So we're launching a new venture, and this is something that is a moment of celebration, but it's a moment that occurs in a wider context of great sadness and reflection, and I think great tenderness as we grapple with the implications of the confirmation of longstanding community knowledge regarding the deaths of children and the way those deaths were handled at Indian residential schools across Canada. And so I want to begin by noting that. And I'm also just going to ask if somebody can make sure that I have screen sharing here. I just want to share a couple of slides that sort of speak to that particular context that we are all in varying ways and to varying degrees grappling with. So I'm just hoping that somebody can empower me to share screen. I seem to have my screen sharing disabled. So is there, Kayla, could you, thank you. We're working on that. We'll get that sorted for you in just a sec. Oh, great. So I want just to draw your attention to a couple of things. The first is a list of resources that have been compiled by our colleagues at the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation. And this includes the National Residential School Crisis Line, and then also phone numbers and resources for different provinces. And these are resources that are designed for residential school survivors, including intergenerational survivors. I also want to draw your attention, particularly if you are like me, descendant of settlers and are from settler communities and histories. I would encourage you to take this as a moment to listen, to learn, to reflect. Our colleagues at the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation have compiled remarkable and wide-ranging resources on their website, and it is linked to there. And for those of us who have resources, I would also encourage you to think about where those might be directed. And one of those places includes the Indian Residential School Survivors Society. and I've linked to that there as well. And I'll make both of these links available in the chat as we go on. So what we are doing here today, in a sense, reminds us of the importance of putting these kinds of histories and conversations about them in a public context and in a sensitive and rigorous way. It is a difficult time, but also one that makes clear the necessity of centering and exploring Indigenous histories and colonial histories in and around the places where we live. And hopefully that is something that this new digital platform that we are launching will do. At the Forks is a joint project of the Centre for Human Rights Research and Mamawipawin. The Center for Human Rights Research was founded in 2012 by founding director Karen Busby, with the aim of working to develop research capacity, create opportunities for students in training at the university and in the wider community. Over the years, the CHRR has undertaken and fostered research on a range of topics, including museums and commemoration, children's rights, reproductive rights, and more. Indigenous rights, especially around water, but also in a range of other contexts, have also always been a central concern. So I became director of the CHRR almost a year ago. It's almost my 1-year birthday as CHRR director. And that was a moment that at the time didn't seem like it was early in the pandemic. It seemed like it was quite a long way into the pandemic. But of course, now in reflection, that seems like such early days to what has emerged as a punishing and ongoing global pandemic. But in that context, two immediate things on my agenda was to build the CHRR's longstanding engagements and the connections between Indigenous and human rights, and also to move online. The Forks platform aims to do both of those things. It takes its name from the place where we are located in. I'm currently on my porch, not very far away from the Assiniboine River, and more particularly from the meetings of the Red and the Assiniboine Rivers in present-day Winnipeg, Manitoba. This place is called Nistatiwak, or 3 Points in Cree, and it is the site of ancient and ongoing histories. As a platform, At the Forks aims to support and disseminate work that engages this particular place within its wider context, namely present-day Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and stretching into our neighbors in northwestern Ontario and south of the Medicine Line. The name At the Forks also gestures to the way that we hope to bring Indigenous and human rights ways of thinking and acting into conversation. The goal here is not to suggest that the two frameworks are one or are interchangeable for one another or without tension. Rather, it's to kind of provide a space to explore the ways that we might help us understand, that both of these ways might help us understand our past and our present. We are interested in work and hope you might consider submitting some of that work that engages these places through the lenses of human and Indigenous rights, and are committed to seeing the way that these historical processes and resistance to them have taken gendered forms and have meant different things for different Indigenous peoples and also for different migrants, settlers, and newcomers. Indigenous histories are far from seamless, and not all settlers have been equally welcome and centered here. Our goal is to publish articles that run between about 1,000 and 5,000 words in kind of a strong visual context, and we'll get back to that in a little bit later. We're aiming in a sense for pieces that are shorter than a standard academic essay or chapter or government report, but more substantial than your usual opinion piece, which generally runs about 600 to 750 words, and definitely have more substance than a tweet. We're hoping to publish material written by community-based authors, by senior undergraduate and graduate students, by both emergent and established scholars. We're interested in prioritizing Indigenous scholarship and art, and also to really disseminating and connecting the important and ongoing work that is being done by researchers in the context where we are located, in the city of Winnipeg and also beyond it, on questions of our Indigenous and colonial past and present. We're hoping that this kind of work can be easily and successfully integrated into classroom teaching, particularly as it remains to greater or lesser extent online, and can be used at both sort of a secondary and post-secondary level. Now, it's probably fairly clear at this point, or it certainly should be, that this has been from the outset a group project with lots of different moving parts and lots of people making a lot of really important contributions. And I will then turn things over now to a couple of those people. And first of them is collaborator and partner in this project, Kiera Ladner.
Thank you, Adele. It is awesome to be here and to be launching this today. Danse que nas na logo, kita masuko. I just want to begin by saying a few words about the other co-host of this. It's hosted at CHRR, but it's also a collaboration between CHRR and Mamawipawin. And Mamawipawin was launched in 2011 with funds from CFI, really to support my research chair at the time. It has evolved into really to try and support research and governance and community-based research projects, Indigenous led projects, as well as allied led projects. We have a number of projects ongoing right now, including a number of digital archive or digital database, digital bundle projects, all have a different name. We have one being led by Dr. Shauna Ferris over in Women and Gender Studies, which is working with sex work activist organizations and doing some archives with them. Shauna and I both work with Walking with Our Sisters, or what remains from Walking with Our Sisters. Adele Perry helped out with this project, recreating Walking with Our Sisters into a digital bundle so that Walking with Our Sisters can continue to be an honoring and a commemoration of the missing and murdered women. We also have a big project on COVID's, working with the COVID Social Impact Network, or the COVID Impact Network, co-hosting this, looking at COVID's impacts on newcomers and Indigenous people in Canada, the US, and Mexico with Lori Wilkinson and Association Canadian Studies. We are so happy to join Adele. I jumped at the chance to do this with Adele, despite busy schedules and everything else. I think it is just such a great opportunity to start to think about different ways of mobilizing knowledge, and really what do we do with so much of the research that is done by students and graduate students that is so phenomenal that seldom sees the light of days outside the university walls or outside of the inbox of papers that we mark. I want to take this time to thank the funders, which are CHRR, Women and Gender Studies through the Margaret Lawrence Foundation, History Department, Faculty of Arts, Mamawipawin, and SHRC. And I also really want to take the time to thank the students that have worked on this project. We have Kayla and Amy with us today, and others, Helen Faulding, the former director, or the former executive director of the center, Pauline Tennant, who is now in the role of manager, and Kirsten Queering. And I know I've probably left some off, and my apologies for that. As Adele was saying, that we are looking to publish work at the intersection of human rights and Indigenous rights and Indigenous histories. We do not look at those as necessarily inclusive or necessarily the same. We really want to tweak out and search out and really investigate that intersection. we were hoping that when we launched today, and I'll be the one that says this, we were hoping that when we launched today that we would have a number of articles posted. We have an article that is up from Adele, and one was supposed to be up from me dealing with treaties and COVID, but that is going to have to wait a week or so. But to give you a taste of the type of articles that we're doing, we both agreed to try and be the initial populators with the hope that we will have some submissions coming in shortly. And I know that we have a couple in, at least in hopes. The work that I'm going to do on treaties is really a very short, pithy piece on focusing on vaccination politics. And I really want to highlight that it's a vaccination politics from a treaty perspective, as well as looking at a treaty-based response to COVID and to government inaction. I'm writing this with a former MA student, Megan Cloutier, and we are working from some of the work that she did for a paper this past year at the University of Calgary during her PhD. This work begins at the Forks. It begins here in Manitoba, although we are taking a prairie stance for this work. This work begins in Manitoba with a comment by Premier Pallister complaining on December 3rd that if First Nations were to receive preferential treatment in the getting vaccines, that Manitobans would be at the back of the line. And this was the case, and he reiterated several times that day that Manitobans would be at the back of the line for vaccines because Ottawa was prioritizing First Nations or Indigenous people for vaccines. He complained and complained. And what's interesting is his complaint was really about that there were priority groups that would not get their vaccine in a timely manner and that other Manitobans would not get their vaccine in a timely manner. Those that needed it. I find these comments problematic for so many reasons. And I'm sure that everyone here holds that same view. They are problematic for so many reasons, both historical and current. What's interesting is that, well, he went on to talk about Indigenous people wrongly being at the front of the line for vaccines. What the reality is that Indigenous people have been at the front of the line for COVID. They've been at the front of the line the whole pandemic, at the front of the line facing the largest socioeconomic impacts, at the front of the line for infections by COVID, at the front of the line for ICU beds. Currently, 42% of ICU beds in the province are First Nations people. This does not include non-status, Métis, or Inuit, only registered as Indians under the Indian Act. 70% of all cases in the province to date have been First Nations people. And of course, only 10% of Manitoba's population is First Nations. It is a different line for First Nations people. And it is a line which should also be acknowledged as a treaty line. And that the response to COVID by the governments, it has been in part by the federal government. They've at least talked and acknowledged treaty, but the response by government should be defined by treaty, and this is what we're going to look at in this paper. That while the front of the line for reasons of disease should also be the front of the line because of treaty. It is a different line. It's a treaty promises 1873 here in Manitoba, 1871, pardon me, Treaty 1 right at the Forks. There were outside promises that were made to healthcare, arguably. Although in 1899 or 1889, a separate agreement was signed acknowledging that these outside promises were dealt with and that healthcare was not one. Regardless as to whether healthcare was in fact a promise in Treaty 1, the Queen's benevolence was a promise in Treaty 1. Other treaties, we know Treaty number 6 includes 3 promises that should be looked at in terms of COVID response. There's my favorite clause in the treaty, assistance during times of starvation and pestilence. And if this isn't a time of pestilence and starvation, like smallpox, which was the basis of this request, I don't know what is. Pestilence and starvation, a medicine chest was supposed to be on all reserves, and general benevolence of the Queen was promised in all of the Prairie treaties. These treaty promises really give reason to start to discuss what the response was and what the response should have been by both provincial and federal governments. When the federal government pushed aside vaccines for First Nations, this wasn't an act of benevolence outside of their obligations. This was living up to obligations. And we need to talk about this. And so this is what the essay will do. We'll also talk about other issues of treaty. And those are, of course, we need to look at how the treaty nations have stepped out of the Indian Act during this pandemic, or as I would say, a syndemic, to exercise the rights of sovereignty that were protected or were supposed to be protected by the treaty. And so this essay will, of course, go further and will engage in issues of treaty federalism or treaty constitutionalism, and we'll look at that pandemic through that lens. So this is the type of research, not necessarily that which we would necessarily always have seen as human rights research, but really pushing that boundary to look at that intersection between Indigenous rights and human rights. Please pay attention to our broadcast for submissions. We really do look forward to seeing submissions from senior scholars, junior scholars, students, and the community. And we hope that this is a portal that will be able to not only be used in our classrooms or in student research, but we also hope that this will be there for community research and for communities that are community members that are really trying to engage and look outside for some materials. I want to just introduce our next speaker, Amy Jackson, one of our phenomenal students that are working on this project. Amy is from Abasquia Cree Nation. She is doing her MA in Native Studies here at the University of Manitoba. She's working both for the CHRR for the summer, as well as Mamawipawin on separate projects. She's just a fantastic powerhouse of a student and a powerhouse of a young researcher who is doing her MA on File Hills back in Saskatchewan. So welcome, Amy, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. I just wanted to take a few minutes to actually go through and show you the website. With huge thanks, of course, to Dr. Adele Perry and Dr. Kiera Ladner for creative freedom and putting together these designs. I was very excited and very inspired, of course, by Prairie history. I think that, well, in Winnipeg, we're at the heart of our country, of our nation, and there's a lot of incredible stories coming out of the prairies, and I was really inspired by that. And so that is where a lot of my imagery comes from. So I'm going to share my screen here. And so this is the banner that I designed with a photo of Fort Garry, an image of Fort Garry that was drawn, I guess, or painted in 1871 and printed in the Toronto News. Very, very cool piece. But it shows, it's like a piece that is like history in action, where you see settlers and Indigenous people together in one piece, which I thought was very fitting. So when we scroll down here, we have a couple of buttons here that take you to the pages with the content. So I went with like the gold, the golden yellows and the greens and the browns and some black with the imagery. And yeah, if you scroll down, here we go. Here is Dr. Adele Perry's introduction to the page that we have the blog on. So the latest posts that come through the website will be featured right here in this area. And of course, if you just click here, it takes you directly to the post that it intros. So this is the original At the Forks post that explains a little bit about the website and the vision, and of course, a piece by Dr. Adele Perry. Then at the bottom, I have these larger buttons that take you directly to, that are navigational. So you take you to different areas of the website. So here you will find the latest posts that we have. Here we will have a list of contributors with their bios and photos. Here the archives will be any articles that are not in the latest, so anything in the past. So and then the staff will be, under the staff button, of course, will be some photos and some bios and information about the people who are behind this website. Credits, I will put photo credits where I got photos from, artists who contributed their photos to the certain blogs, and things like that. So that is where I will enter all of the credits. Of course, if you notice on the bottom hand corner of these images, there is a credit there, but I also want to give full credit where you can find this information, where you can find the artist or etc. That will be under credits. Again, there's another archive button. So like if you are searching for a particular article, you can find it here. And then I put a page for the funding. So to acknowledge the partners that have put At the Forks together. So yeah, so there's a little walkthrough of the website. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward, and I hope you enjoy it. Oh, and I guess I should hand it off. Yes, so I believe I hand it right back to Kayla.
Thank you for that, Amy. So we're going to do a little Q&A session now. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. The first one I will ask and direct it to either Dr. Perry or Dr. Ladner, whoever wants to take this one. So the first one is, how do we submit an article and is there a deadline?
Ooh. So I'll take that one. Yeah, how do you submit an article? You can send us an email. So you can send an email to me at adele.perry@umanitoba.ca. I think if you also send it to CHRRMAN@umanitoba.ca, it will also get through to the right people. We're looking at this as an ongoing project. So we're hoping to have regular content sort of featured. So there is no fixed deadline. We're looking at something that hopefully we'll post things a couple of times a month. And we're also looking at kind of building something that kind of has some sort of organic capacity to change as people's needs and the kind of work they are doing does. So you're certainly welcome to sort of be in touch and to ask further questions as well.
I think that the other great thing is that we have the um, opportunity with this to also offer some honorariums to writers on this, and I think that that's just a fantastic thing that we can do with this, especially for the students. And we will also be including and trying to reach out to Indigenous artists and including Indigenous art, and trying to match and make this as visually appealing as this website that's been designed. And it is I'm reading all the comments as they come up, and it is absolutely beautiful. Amy, thank you for that. So I'll return this to the floor if there's any other questions.
There's one more question here. So it is, what is the timeline from a piece being submitted to it being up on the website?
Oh, excellent question there. So many of you who are familiar with academic publishing probably know that it can often be pretty slow. And one of the virtues of a platform like this is that we can hopefully be a little faster. So it will probably depend on what we have already scheduled. But I think certainly in the early days, which we are now sort of beginning, we could look at things probably going from submission to going live within somewhere between a couple of weeks to a month. So we're not going to have a formal peer review process. We're going to have more of an editorial process. And this will involve graduate students and some of the other students who are involved in this project as sort of a really interesting and kind of generative process of working with submissions and working with people who would like to contribute. So everything will be read by at least 2 people, and we will work with it, but we don't foresee that being a particularly slow process. I'll also say for people who are involved in other kind of web-based platforms, we're also really interested in cross-posting and in featuring work that is done in collaboration with other kind of similar things with kind of roughly compatible aims.
Thank you. I got a couple more questions in. So one of them is, do you have any suggestions for components that you would like to see in the pieces that would make them more interactive?
If you know of artwork or digital media that would be really visually appealing or would make them more interactive, if you know or have ideas for that, submit it with your articles or urge others to submit them with their articles. I think that this gives us a platform to try new things. So if you have ideas to try really different or innovative things in knowledge mobilization, I think that both Adele and I are really into trying these things. I know that Mamawipawin, that's what we try to do. As a result, we're stuck on a couple big things of archive development that takes 4 years longer, 5 years longer, because we're developing our own software because the software doesn't work for us. So I think that that is the type of innovation that I know I'm interested in. So if there's ideas, so I think that we would very much like to try to do what is really innovative and to try and just break those boundaries between the academy and community in different ways as well. So Adele, any other ideas on that?
Yeah, I'll just ditto all of that. I think we have some ideas of sort of artwork and archival pieces that we will use. I think this is the kind of project that needs to be strong visually. And I think, Amy has done such amazing work to kind of make that possible. But absolutely, we're open to different ideas and different possibilities. And we're open to just also just sort of talking about things. But certainly, if you're thinking about pieces of writing, if you have images, if you have artists that you can suggest and we can kind of connect with, I think the more ways that we can kind of build connection and also think about new ways of working and disseminating knowledge, that is something we are ready for.
Thank you for answering those questions. I have a couple more that came in. One of them is there a criteria or requirement for the eligibility of applicants?
You know, not that I can think of in any particular sort of clear way, in the sense that we're looking for people that are writing about these questions. I think we are all committed to centering Indigenous scholarship and perspectives and art and cultural production. But I think we are also interested in the range of ways that people coming from a number of different kind of locations, broadly defined, engage these questions. So I don't think there is any particular kind of criteria.
I think one thing that makes this interesting is also using this as a venue to launch new ideas and new research. That when you're playing around, I know that we're have a project on missing and murdered women, and we've been working with Walking with Our Sisters, and as we're playing around with how to launch this and reach different audiences, I think that this is a great platform that can possibly do that, rather than to just go to some dry academic journal. I think that we, as academics, we need to do both, and I think that this would be a place to launch something that's visual, like Walking with Our Sisters. So I don't think that we have an absolute idea as to what we have in mind. I think that COVID has shown us that, you know, the world is open and open to anything.
Thank you. I'll move on to the next one. The website is appropriately focused on Indigenous peoples in the Prairie provinces. Are you interested in transnational pieces or pieces that engage with the global definitions of Indigenous identity? She was thinking of the UN and how other Indigenous communities in other settler societies are engaging with potentially similar or dissimilar human rights issues.
So thank you for that question that comes from Carla Joubert. We are absolutely interested in maintaining kind of both a focus on this particular context we're working in, but understanding that these particular places only make sense within the wider context and amid wider connections. And I think in different ways, both Kiera and I are committed to kind of transnational and interconnected sort of scholarship. And so I think one of the things, and I should explain a little bit of this in the essay that is live already, is that we're interested in seeing is things that do draw those connections. So we are absolutely interested in work that kind of walks that line between being rooted in the local and knowing that the local only makes sense in a global, trans-imperial, interconnected Indigenous world. And so I think that's something that we would also like to sort of see this as a project to be able to feature.
Great. And one more here. It is, would poetry or short stories that are grounded in research be an appropriate submission?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. And I don't know if that's something that we have entirely sort of had a huge amount of thought given to, but I think we're certainly open to the idea and to talking about what that kind of might look like. And I think, you know, there are a lot of writers and researchers and people whose work kind of bridge those two kind of aspects of kind of production in and around the communities that we're engaged with. And that's something that we could certainly look to thinking about. I think we have on the call Jocelyn Thorpe, and I'll just give a bit of a shout out to Jocelyn, who works with the center in a couple of ways, but is also, I think I'm allowed to say, the new incoming director of the Center for Creative Writing and Oral Culture. Yes, there's Jocelyn saying hi. And so one of the things that as we kind of move forward and work on these projects that we're thinking about doing is also some of the ways that we can kind of build those connections. And so the kind of work that you're raising there might be something that could fit within that sort of connection, for sure.
All right, I do not see any more questions coming in. So with that, I want to say thank you to everyone who took the time out of their Friday to join us and spend your day with us. If you have any more questions that come up later, you can feel free to email Dr. Perry or Dr. Ladner or the center, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. So thank you so much, Chi Miigwech, and I hope you all have a great day.